that the builder wants to implement, the blueprint. But just like a builder isn't going to build a site if he goes out there to the land and discovers that there's like a giant tree root right where he's supposed to be digging the basement, right? Then he'd have to reconsider and say, we're going to have to adjust the plan because there's a tree root. And that is sort of metaphorically equivalent to epigenetics. It is adjustments to the blueprint. Or to put it in terms of genetics, adjustments to the genetic code. And it does not change the gene. The gene is the same. The gene is the same. But it does change what the gene expresses. So remember, each gene makes a protein. In that video, they call them enzymes. Enzymes are made up of proteins. So it's like the junk DNA that we know isn't junk DNA, but the DNA that isn't part of a gene has sort of like a filter that teases out what's actually in the environment. And if what's in the gene isn't well aligned with what the environment is expecting, then it makes that change. And you read about a couple of them, right? The methylation, the tightening. You don't have to worry about the technicalities, okay? One thing it might do is tighten the DNA around that histone, right? What happens? That gene can't express itself. It can't make its protein. Why? Because that extra DNA that they used to call junk DNA put out its antenna to the environment and realized that it's not a good idea to express this gene. The environment needs something else. The example in the video was a situation where after you were born, there was a lot of stress in your situation for whatever reason in your home, and that maybe the enzyme that causes a person to contend well with stress, it was shut off. This person needed to be on high alert. This baby needed to be on high alert. That protein isn't produced in their body. The gene is still there for it. The instructions are there, but the environment says, that's not going to work, okay? So that's the big idea between epigenetics and genetics. And then this nurture piece, what we talked about last time were these reasons why an individual seems to be fairly well aligned with their environment. Like, why are some of you here in the Navajo Nation and some others of you have moved on? Is it because there's something that you who are here were born with that leads you to stay here? Is there something about your trait that leads you to stay here while other people leave? That's just one example. Or why is it that I'm often working alone in my house and liking it? Is there some sort of a trait in me that makes me like to kind of work alone, right? So why do people seem to be well suited to their environment? Or why are these traits expressed like this? And that's where we talked about these correlations. The passive, I'm just going to write gene environment or genotype environment correlation. Meaning I didn't do a thing. I was just born into people who had similar genes to me. And because their genes were similar, the home was similar. And so that trait was reinforced and strengthened in me. Passive, I didn't do a thing. I just was born there. And then there was the active mechanism, gene environment correlation. And these are the choices we make. You can picture this even from a young age. Children in preschool, if they go to a preschool or to a daycare, what choices do they make about what to do at that preschool or daycare? Do they choose to do a lot of the loud screaming, running around games? Or do they choose the quiet corners? And as they have choices and make those choices, they're doing more of the same. So those traits are reinforced. That's that active mechanism. And the third one, which most of you seem to choose, maybe because we covered it last, at least the ones I graded so far, was the evocative gene environment correlation. And you mostly used it correctly. It means that we bring out certain behaviors in others. And so you can picture maybe a really outgoing child who's having friends over to their house, let's say. Everyone has friends over at some point. And this is a really outgoing child, very social. And what kind of things does she, let's make it a girl, what kind of things does she choose to do with her friends? Is she saying like, hey, let's go climb that tree and then let's tease the neighbor kids and let's go pet that. Is that the kind of thing this child is doing? And if so, what are her friends doing? Are they saying, I'm not sure, but okay, right? Because the child is outgoing, she evoked more outgoing behaviors in her peers, therein strengthening her own trait. So this right here is sort of like talking about the interaction between, not the interaction, that's a different mechanism, the relationship between genes and environment. Okay. So I just wanted to clarify that. Are there any questions about this before we get started on that mini quiz and our new content for today? Any clear?
No.
Yes. Bernice, thank you for answering. All right then, so you can go into your chapter 2A and take, let me get this out of here if I can get my mouse over there. There it is. And you can take that mini quiz. It's just 5 items. You'll have 5 minutes once you start. And if you get started right away, that'll be the best thing. You have to click first on module 2B. That's what I should have said. I'll show you so that everybody knows. So 2A, you can close if it's open for you. You can click on that little triangle, although you should remember to take your second quiz attempt. So you can minimize that. And then you can start right here with read the chapter. Actually, it's not sequenced in, but I'm going to make it sequenced in right now. You're going to want to get started on that mini quiz. So right here. So you can begin. I'm going to get this sequenced in right now. So you can, it's going to yell at me a minute, but that's okay.
Is that the quiz on genetics?
Nope. That we're in 2B now, so you should take the 2B mini quiz and it'll be on prenatal development and birth, the reading that you did assigned for today. So I'm always wanting to encourage you to do your reading before you come to class because it'll help you, in my opinion.
Oh, okay. I was confused. Thanks.
Vermont. And Carolyn? Shandina? I'll get it sooner or later, Shandina. Thank you for your patience with that. Kristen? Fabricia? Lorena? Yes. Darian, right? Alyssa? Lacey? Lindsay? Frida? Frida? I see you online. Next time I take attendance, I'm gonna ask you guys to speak up online here. Tylea? Yep, nice.
I'm here.
Yeah, I see you there. Thank you. And Caitlin. No, Washington. I have to just say your name aloud. It's the only way. Almost done here. April? April. And I saw Bernice. And I don't think Cubby. Oh, Cubby. I think I had you marked as colleague. Colleague. Cubby here?
Over here.
You're colleague.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. There's a Khabib also. Kabibe, yellow hair. That's the one I just said. but I don't think I've met that person. Okay, we're ready to go on. How was it? Not too bad. Okay, good. It should be just right. I hope. All right, so let's take a look at what we're doing. We're going to be talking today about a lot of words that might be uncomfortable if you're not used to hearing them, because we're talking a lot of, yes. I didn't read every name, but I don't think what's your name? Oh, I think I saw you online, so I just marked you. Thanks. Thank you for reminding me though, Shana. Okay, so today we're talking about words that can sometimes be uncomfortable because we're talking about the reproductive process, the fertilization of egg with sperm, and then how that comes through into development. So we'll just get comfortable with it because this is all part of this beautiful natural process. And I want to make one more point. I'm teaching you from today and probably last class too, and probably so far all along, from a Western scientific perspective. We're talking about biological functions right now, and so we're not getting into other perspectives. We will have space for other perspectives like Navajo perspectives when we get past this biology segment a little bit, and then we'll have time for more other perspectives on development. But I did get an email that there's some sort of human development in the Dene perspective. There's like sessions happening, and I'll pull that up during my break and share it with you because you might be interested. All right, so gametes and fertilization. So I'm hoping we can stick with a schedule like this. So far, I've never succeeded, but we'll see what we can do. And we have a first discussion that will be related to your application question at the end of this lecture. We'll take a break, and then we're going to have the next two parts of these lectures. And if we are running out of time, I'm going to lend my focus to the teratogens, to part 3, because I think that's really essential. So that's how we'll kind of organize it in the event, the very likely event that we run out of time. So let's go ahead. So these are some of the questions that you might consider in this chapter. And I know you all know how pregnancy occurs, but we're going to go into more detail about it now. We're going to talk about how conception takes place, but not from the perspective of what you already know, but from what's happening inside with egg and sperm actually inside the body. Okay. The energy source that's fueling the gametes, we'll talk about all those terms well. A couple things about why sometimes it's hard for people to conceive. What can be done to enable pregnancy if people can't conceive. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And in part 1, we're going to talk about gamete production, the functions of hormones, artificial reproductive technologies. So hopefully you'll feel comfortable with those ideas before we're done. You guys who are on Zoom, I just love it if you put your faces on. It just makes me feel like you're really here. Thank you, Erin and Cheyenne. I see yours is on too, although I can't see your face. Okay, so you can see right here, we're jumping right in. Here are the terms that you're going to need to know. We'll talk more about these. I guess they're fading a little bit. So first off, gonads, gametes, and hormones. That's what's on this slide. I'll just overview them in terms of the terms for right now. So the gonads, those are the glands, just 2 glands. You have a whole endocrine system with many glands. Your pancreas, your thyroid, many, many glands. But now we're talking about just the reproductive glands, and they're called the gonads. And so in females, those are the ovaries. And in males, those are the testes inside the testicles. So the gonads. So the ovaries in a female, they store and produce ova. And ova, another word for eggs, ovum, if it's just one egg. They also produce hormones in general, but primarily female typical hormones, hormones, which are estrogens and androgens. I missed an F there, I just saw. Okay. Just skipping here then, the sex hormones, as mentioned already. I'm sorry, let me finish here. The sperm are produced in the testes. Okay. The container, the scrotum is the container for the testes. And androgens are also produced there. Androgens are male typical hormones that include testosterone, which you'll all have probably heard about from many commercials on TV. So the male hormones are called androgens again, and one of the most common is testosterone, which we link to libido, like the drive for life and the sex drive, and also to like aggression, the tendency maybe to be aggression, to be more dominant, to have power from a psychological perspective. Female hormones, I wrote estrogen. We can also think of progesterone. We'll talk about those more later, produced in the ovaries. And then the gametes, that's just the name for those reproductive cells, which in males are the sperm, and in females are the ova, the eggs, and that's it, okay? And they are haploid cells. So let's move on then and talk about these gametes a little more. So they're referring to sperm and ova. You can see here that they each have a nucleus. This ovum, single egg, has a nucleus, and you can guess what these strings are inside of it. They're strands of DNA, right? Which will tighten up into chromosomes when they're ready to go through meiosis. And the sperm also has a nucleus, not shown here, with the little genetic material in there. Exactly half of the cells as our somatic cells, half of the number of chromosomes as our somatic cells, and of course involved in reproduction. All right. We know that the DNA and genes in each gamete is unique and unlike any other, and just reviewing this, it's because of that process of crossing over that happens during meiosis. Here we have these matched pairs. In a somatic cell, nothing happens. Each cell gets one from mom, one from dad. But if we want to have unique individuals, this crossing over process happens, and each gamete then gets a mixture of information from mom and dad. So that's a little bit of a review. So gamete production, I mentioned before that a female has every egg she will ever have relatively early in prenatal development. Now, how's that for? Now, those eggs, they're called oocytes. They're not ready to be fertilized. They have to be kind of nourished with different hormones when she reaches puberty. You can't just introduce a spoon to those little oocytes inside a baby and she gets pregnant. No, but they're there. The seeds for those eggs are there already, all right? And of course, during puberty, she starts to have those eggs mature and goes through the normal menstrual cycle. And then at the end of those times, since those ova were with her before she was born, they get too old to produce healthy offspring. And that's when the woman goes through menopause and no longer can she conceive. When we say puberty, just to be very clear terminology-wise, we're not talking about the broader period of adolescence, which is like, you know, the teenage years, more or less. We're talking about specifically the time when a person's body matures so that they can reproduce. So when we say puberty, we're talking about that specific physical point in time. All right. A male, on the other hand, has no sperm at all until puberty. And at that point, he starts to have viable sperm. And interestingly, he continues to produce sperm until he dies. So even this very old man is continuing to produce sperm. Now, not so much as when he was young. And some of the sperm, more likely the sperm won't be very healthy, more likely problems, but still there. So quite a different process for males and females. Let's see here. So I already know that they contain the chromosomes, but ova and sperm also contain mitochondria, which I find to be really interesting, which is an energy source. So what's the point of the energy? Well, in sperm, they have different points. Let me just see how I did fade it in there. So just a quick highlight here. In sperm, the mitochondria is like a little battery that allows it to swim all the way up to the egg, right? For one thing, motility, it's got to move. That sperm's got to swim. It also has to have the means to get into the egg, which doesn't always welcome sperm, you know, it's kind of like a picky, right? It also has to be able to release its genetic content. So it needs energy, but once it's not allowed in the egg. It sometimes happens but typically that mitochondria, any energy that's left when the sperm reaches the egg is reabsorbed. There are cases where it gets in, but it's not supposed to, because once the egg is fertilized, the female's mitochondria provides the energy. And what does it need energy for? Well, it's got to provide energy throughout, it's got to translate, it's got to divide into all its cells to make the new little baby. That energy is from the egg, not from the sperm. The sperm spends all its energy just getting there, more or less. All right. So a little bit about the sperm. These numbers really differ. We're going to watch a video a little later where I think it says 300 million. So I don't know if anyone's ever counted, but it's a lot. I've also seen different things on how long it takes to mature. So I've seen between 72 hours and 2 weeks for a sperm to go through its whole process of meiosis and become mature sperm ready to be released. Of course, any that's not released is just reabsorbed into the body. Mixed with seminal fluid, the fluid itself is just kind of sugar, but the sperm are within that. And the sperm, of course, are the viable reproductive. They'll live 12 to 48 hours. So if the sperm has been released and there's a possibility of a woman becoming pregnant, when her egg is viable, there's like 12 to 48 hours with living sperm that could potentially fertilize that egg. Sperm are very sensitive. They need a body, they need to be in a temperature that's like, 2 to 4 degrees below the body temperature. And so they're protected inside that scrotal sac. They're protected and kept at a good temperature. And you can see that changes in shape and appearance depending on whether it's hot or cold outside. Living sperm, if it gets too warm, will die, or no new sperm will be produced. And then here's just a little more about that mitochondria. I wanted you to see that the energy center is right here, just below the front of the sperm or the head of the sperm. The nucleus with all the genetic material is up here. And this acrosome is part of the strong strength that releases chemicals that allows it to get into the egg. And of course, this tail is what swims, does all the work, about 1,000 times a minute. Oh no, I can't remember. It's got to really move fast to get that sperm up to the egg, because it's like, in sperm perspective, it's a really long way. Okay, so that's about what I have for sperm, although we'll look at some nice, beautiful video footage of the sperm meeting the egg at the end of this little content. So the eggs itself, it's always surprising sometimes how little we know about our own bodies. That was definitely true of me when I was young. Thanks to a couple more of you who put your faces on. Lorena, I see you here too, so make sure that we get you marked, and Kristen. Okay, so let's just take a look at this. So what we're looking at here is the reproductive material inside a female's body. So let's just orient a little bit. We're looking at the uterus in the center. This is where the eventual, if there's a fertilized egg, this is where it's going to grow. It's going to start in here, and this is where the baby will grow eventually, if it gets fertilized. All right. And oocyte is that immature egg that's in even a newborn baby growth. An egg that's not ready. Once a month, the body chooses usually just one egg to lavish with attention until it gets officially ready to be fertilized. Sorry, I'm spacing out just a moment here. I've got to get my head together. All right, so what happens? We have the release of the egg from the ovary. So this is where all of these little oocytes are formed, and they're released like they're nourished. You can see that they're starting to develop. It's called a luteinizing hormone that's released that helps this eggs to develop, and eventually it breaks out of this shell and it starts to travel. It's traveling up the fallopian tubes, and as it's traveling through the tubes, or when it reaches the uterus, at any time along there, it can get fertilized. So the sperm have to come up this way through the vaginal opening. They can break through here, which will eventually be the cervix. This will be, if the woman gets pregnant, this will be plugged up with mucus so that this baby has a nice, safe place to grow. When the woman is fertile, this mucus becomes very thin and slippery. See if we can get that to right. To aid the sperm in getting to the egg. All right, and that's when during ovulation, and ovulation just means when an egg is ready to be fertilized. All right, so this mucus that's here changes. So then the sperm are coming up this way, swimming away, and somewhere in here, you know, in this example right around here, you can see this egg got fertilized. And you can tell that this is fertilized because it's starting to divide into more cells. Now it's 2 cells, here it's 4 cells, here it's 8 cells. It's still traveling along, pushed along, whoops, by little hair-like structures called cilia in the fallopian tubes, traveling along to come all the way into here to the uterus, where if the body is all ready, there'll be a nice blood lining here, heavy, thick with blood, and that egg can implant in there and start to take nutrients from the body. You'll see this word blastocyst, a new word. It's just representing a fertilized egg that has started to differentiate. The cells are starting to have different functions. That's when we call the blastocyst, and we'll look at that word more later. Sometimes there can be problems. Endometriosis, there can be kind of growths along this endometrium or even in the fallopian tubes. A woman sometimes can feel a lot of pain when that happens, and it can also make it hard for her to get pregnant because the egg can't move along smoothly as it needs to. Questions about this? Okay, let's just look a little bit at those hormones. You don't need to memorize this. You don't need to memorize this. Let's put an X by it. But they're in the image, and so I just wanted to leave them there and explain what they were. So what you'll see here is you're looking through the days of a cycle. So this is the first day after menstruation, and this is when she begins menstruating again. Menstruation, as you know, is the point when no egg has implanted, no egg was fertilized, then the body has to shed this lining. It's shed through the vagina as menstrual blood. If the egg is implanted, hopefully, ideally, this mucus plug becomes thicker and this lining is retained to nourish the baby. Okay, so let's just take a look quickly at the hormones. So first off, we're looking at this luteinizing hormone. It's abbreviated below as LH and showing in yellow. And that's what forms the blood and tissue around the developing ova. So that egg, remember, it's just an oocyte, and then it has to kind of develop and become ready for fertilization, and that's that luteinizing hormone. You can see on this schedule, and this is the month then, right? Here is, you know, the end of menstruation, and you can see this luteinizing hormone peaks right around that time when the egg is ready to be fertilized. So this right here is ovulation. This, the woman depicted in here has an egg that's ready for fertilization. Okay, right here where this heart is. The follicle stimulating hormone causes the ova to mature, prompts the meiosis process. These are the two we're mainly concerned with, the estrogen and progesterone. The estrogen, in this blue color here, you can see what it's doing after the cycle. It kind of increases fairly quickly in the days before ovulation. The estrogen promotes the formation of the lining of the uterus. The estrogen also does something else at a more subtle level. It makes the woman feel more sexual desire, like she might not be interested in sex that much, but when she's ovulating, usually she is. It also makes her appear more sexually attractive to a male, typically through pheromones. And this is done through smell. It's like a very subtle thing, probably related to a really primitive sense of smell. And it also prepares, as I mentioned, that uterine lining, that nice bloody surface of the uterus that helps to support the developing, what will eventually be the baby. Progesterone is in this pink here, and you can see what happens. The estrogen goes down and the progesterone props up. The progesterone calms the woman down. Sometimes women can feel kind of irritable at certain times related to estrogen being a stimulating hormone. The progesterone calms that kind of emotionality down, and it also helps retain the uterine lining. I wrote it here, so I won't write it again, if the egg is fertilized. If we didn't have the progesterone, that lining would just go away and the egg would have no place to land. Right? It also thickens the cervical mucus so that the whatever's in there stays in there, right? The developing embryo, whatever phase we're talking about stays in. So those are the cyclical hormones in females. Let me see if I need to. I think I don't need to point anything out in here. It's just redundant there. Just as a very quick, because I've had students in the past ask, what do birth control pills actually do? What they do is they just keep those levels of estrogen and progesterone steady. So no longer do we have that surge in estrogen. Without the surge in estrogen, no egg. So it's just steady, both hormones are need. No progesterone, there can't be the nurturing of another egg. It also keeps that cervical plug-in, making it harder for sperm to get up there anyhow. Let's see, I'm gonna kind of keep it short, so I don't know that we need to talk about it. The mood fluctuations, often called premenstrual syndrome, do relate to these shifting hormones, which are stimulating or calming in turn, and the shifts, and then the rapid shifts in the hormones each month can lead to that. With estrogens in the CNS, this means central nervous system, being more stimulating, more arousing. I don't mean in a sexual way, I just mean in general, her body is more keyed up. And then the opposite of that, after ovulation, we have the calming in the central nervous system. The parasympathetic kicks in. She'll feel calm if it's a good amount. If it's too much, maybe she'll feel even tired and lethargic a little. Okay, let's skip this. This is just talking about, you probably heard even IVF. People are talking about it all the time because Alabama banned it, because they thought it was like abortion. So we'll look at what it actually is shortly. That our vice presidential candidate on the Democrat side talked about having gone through IVF, in vitro fertilization. This is just kind of getting at why are we having trouble? What are more people having trouble conceiving, and if so, why? It's not important for our class, so it's just there. We do know radiation affects sperm and eggs, but some people have worried about cell phones, like carrying cell phone in the pocket near the gonads. Is that going to affect reproductive? As far as any science that we have, the answer is no. And the same is true for a microwave oven, no. There's no evidence that either of those affect the gonads or the production of gametes in males or females. So just because people have wondered. Let's save this talk about androgen and estrogen for another time. It's not on the quiz and it's not in your book. We'll get to it toward the end. So there are a lot of reproductive technologies now, and we're going to watch a little video of one in a moment. But this should have faded in a little bit differently. So I'm just going to do it right now. Let me just pop this up and have it come in afterwards. So, oh, there it is, still there. Oh, I selected the wrong thing. Okay, ignore that on the right side of the screen. So what could cause infertility? In males, you could have a low sperm count. What could cause a low sperm count? Well, age for one. Also, things like smoking and marijuana use are linked to a lower sperm count. There may be other factors as well, like stress. The body might be less inclined to want to have stress. Ejaculation problems could be related to problems of sexual functionality, which again are impacted through a gradual decline in androgens as males get older. And that can lead to more difficulty being sexually active, which can lead to ejaculation problems. And there could also be other sexual function things. And this one I put on here, I changed my image. The first image I had showed these ROS. All they are mechanisms through which the sperm can have an exchange of oxygen, let's say. But if there's too much ROS, it can be problematic and break down the shell of the sperm. It's irrelevant. I only had it because I had a different picture up here. So there can be things that happen that way. But the infertility, if a couple can't conceive, can also be in females. And what might happen? Well, maybe an egg never got released. There's something up with that luteinizing hormone and no egg is being nourished into maturity. Or maybe this endometriosis, and those are those cysts that can grow on the endometrium inside the uterus or in the fallopian tubes. Well, what happens when there's a bunch of roadblocks? Either the sperm can't get to the egg or the egg can't travel well enough to get back to the uterus. Does that kind of make sense? Or maybe, in fact, the woman is producing an egg. And maybe the sperm is reaching the egg and is even fertilizing the egg, and it's traveling along through the fallopian tube, but the uterine lining isn't strong enough, it isn't big enough. It's not thick enough to support the growing, at that stage, blastocyst, the embryo fetus. So all those things could happen, right? And so what can we do about it now? Well, artificial reproductive technologies. And by the way, I have a question for you. Looking at this first one, artificial insemination. It's just implanting the sperm in the uterus directly so that it doesn't have to travel so far. Do you guys, do not all people do that with sheep? I think I heard someone, do you actually have like a male sheep fertilizing the females, or like a lot of cattle, they have artificial insemination. They take sperm from a healthy bull and insert it into the uterus of a female. Does that happen here with sheep and goats?
When I was in FFA, they did.
What'd you say?
When I was in FFA.
They did artificial insemination. Well, how about that? We can be like goats then, because they do that for people too if the sperm are having a hard time. I know they do that all the time with cattle. I guess I don't exactly know the reason. I guess it's taking less of a chance and ensuring that all of the cows get pregnant at once. In vitro fertilization, IVF, is the one that, now I'm drawing a blank on his name, our vice presidential candidate talked about. And so we're going to look at a little video of it. So it's like they cause a woman to produce a lot of eggs by injecting more luteinizing hormone in. And when she produces a lot of eggs, they withdraw them through a procedure that's not surgery, but they withdraw them through a different tool. And then they fertilize them in a petri dish, so to speak, with sperm that the male has produced.
And sometimes they end up with like a bunch of quadruplets or.
Yeah, and it's because it's such a risk, it's such an unlikely process that it's gonna work. And so they have to like do a lot of them. So they'll harvest maybe 8 eggs from a woman, and then maybe fertilize all 8 of them, because they have to observe, well, which one's gonna be, not all of them are gonna, it's not gonna work every time. And so they have to harvest a lot. That means a lot of them maybe get produced, 6 or 8. And usually they freeze the extras in case the couple wants more babies. And that's where the issue came up in Alabama. If you kill those little blastocysts, is that like killing a baby? And that's kind of a philosophical debate. And sometimes if a woman can't carry a pregnancy for whatever reason, they can use surrogacy. And that means an egg from another woman, like if someone can't get pregnant, their egg would be withdrawn and fertilized, and then it would be implanted in a different woman who would carry the pregnancy. Now, all that, when there's so many babies needing adoption, but we don't have, any of us have the right to judge anyone else's decisions. So I imagine that would be hard though, to carry a baby to term and then give it up right at birth. But if you can conceive. A little bit more here. Remember our Tay-Sachs family who had that disease? They both had the recessive gene that killed their child at the age of 3. I don't imagine they ever want to go through that again. And so it's very likely when we saw that mom pregnant in that video, it's very likely they had some sort of genetic testing done to make sure that they didn't create another child with that two recessive genes that would kill that child as such a young one in such a difficult way. So there are a few ways they can do it. Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Implantation is what we refer to when that egg implants in the uterus. So before it implants, we test it. So we could test the fertilized egg, the undeveloped eggs, or the sperm before fertilization. And couples who are at high risk, like that couple, might do something like that. We can also test things after implantation. So we can get maternal blood samplings looking for different hormones that should be present. Maybe you have known someone who's had amniocentesis. That's a misspelling there too. And what they do in that case is they put a needle right through, maybe like 4 months along, when she's about 4 months pregnant. They draw out some of the amniotic fluid, which is like the liquid that surrounds the developing fetus. If you say your water breaks, they're talking about amniotic fluid, that's the water. And they can draw it out and test that. Make sure that there's no genetic thing going on there. Ultrasound, that image of a fetus, probably if you know someone who is pregnant in the last 15 years, they probably had an ultrasound, which is an image that they take that, maybe your friend sent you because they were excited, that little image that they take to make sure that the structure of the body is all in place, that they can see the heart beating, that it just looks good from a structural level. And then this last one, chorionic villi sampling. The chorionic villi is like the blood supply, the source of the blood supply, and that also would be able to discern what's going on genetically with that baby. So that's kind of a big mouthful. I do want to show you a little video